purpose of this training video is to instruct the maintenance crew in how to carry out diesel engine maintenance correctly, effectively and by using the right tools. For the removal and reassembly of the cylinder head, piston, cylinder liner, connecting rod and main bearing, the following tools are needed. A set consisting of 4 hydraulic cylinders for loosening and tightening the cylinder head screws, a lifting tool for the cylinder head, assembly-disassembly tool for the valves, a hydraulic jack, a pneumatically driven high-pressure hydraulic pump, a T-wrench for opening and closing the indicator cock, a turning tool for color testing the valves and the valve seats, a valve clearance feeler gauge, hydraulic hand pump, a hydraulic cylinder for loosening and tightening the connecting rod bolts, a clamping device for the piston rings, a lifting tool for the piston, pliers for removing and assembling the securing rings, pliers for removing and mounting the piston rings, a pin for tightening the nuts, a tool for pushing out the anti-polishing ring, an assembly ring for the anti-polishing ring when lowering down the piston, a honing tool for the cylinder liner, tools for removing and assembly of the big end bearing. The hydraulic pump can be connected in 2 different ways. 1. As shown in the training video, connect the manometer straight to the last hydraulic jack. 2. Connect the hose between the last hydraulic jack and the hydraulic pump. Dismantling the cylinder head. Firstly, drain the engine jacket cooling water to the maintenance water tank. Open the indicator cocks. Secondly, turn the cylinder in question to top dead center to unload the valve mechanism. Remove the panels of the hot box in front of the cylinder head. Take off the cylinder head bonnet top cover. Remove the HT water pipes on the cylinder head. Take off the cylinder head bonnet casing. Remove the insulation cover on the rear of the cylinder head to make access to the exhaust pipe and air inlet pipe. Remove the clamp of the exhaust gas pipe and disconnect the air inlet pipe. Or in other modifications, remove the exhaust gas pipe clamp and air inlet pipe. Remove the small pipes at the front of the cylinder head, as well as the injection pipes to both the main and pilot injection valves. Cover the open connections with a plastic cap or tape. Disconnect the cables of the exhaust gas temperature sensors. Open the bolts of the rocker arm bracket and lift off the bracket. Remember to mark the push rods. Lift out the push rods from their protection pipes. Cover the open holes of the pushrod pipes. Remove the protection cap of the cylinder head bolts before lifting on the hydraulic tool set on the bolts for the cylinder head. Screw down the hydraulic cylinders on the cylinder head bolts. Connect the hoses according to the figure shown. Screw down the cylinders completely to spill out all the oil back into the tank for the hydraulic power pack. To do this, the return valve must, of course, be open. These two levels must be at the same level before the pressure is increased. After the cylinders are in their lowest position, open each one 3/4 of a turn by turning it counterclockwise. Raise the hydraulic pressure to the stated value. And loosen the nuts 3/4 of a turn using the special pin or by turning the same pin 5 times from side to side in the distant sleeve slot located underneath the hydraulic cylinder. Release the pressure carefully by opening the return valve to the hydraulic power pack tank. Check that all the cylinder head nuts are loose, as well as the hydraulic cylinders. Remove the hydraulic hoses and lift off the hydraulic cylinder set. Then screw off the 4-cylinder head nuts.
Pidä.
Lift off the cylinder head carefully with the help of the lifting tool. When lifting off the head, simultaneously take care of the protection pipes for the push rods. Remove them after they are free from the head side.
Ja nosta varovaisesti ja pidä noin. Noin. Hyvä.
Protect the cylinder liner with preferably a plywood cover. The starting air pipe connection, as well as other pipes, must also be covered to prevent foreign objects from entering them. Dismantling the piston and connecting rod. Remove the crankcase doors for the cylinder in question. Turn the crankshaft to B DC. Put two distance sleeves crosswise on the two diagonally opposite connecting rod screws. Screw on two hydraulic cylinders. Connect the hoses according to the figure shown. Open the pump valve. Keep on turning the hydraulic cylinders until the piston and the cylinder faces are even. Open the hydraulic cylinder half a turn, 180 degrees. Close the pump valve and raise the pressure to the stated value, according to the engine manual. Open the nut half a turn with the special pin, or using the same pin, turn the nut 5 times from side to side in the distant sleeve slot. Open the pump valve slowly. Disconnect the hoses after checking that the nuts and the cylinders are loose. Shift over the hydraulic cylinders to the other two connecting rod screws and repeat the procedure. Remove 3 of the nuts at B DC. Turn the engine to about 20 degrees before T DC. Mount the pushing tool for the anti-polishing ring into the 3 slots made for this purpose. Turn the piston carefully to T DC. The anti-polishing ring dismounting tool will then push out the anti-polishing ring from the cylinder liner. Remove the last connecting rod nut. If the anti-polishing ring doesn't have slots, assemble the special removing tool above the piston and pull out the anti-polishing ring with it. Clean the threaded holes in the piston or the lifting tool bolts. Mount the lifting tool. Lift the piston carefully out from the cylinder liner when it leaves the cylinder liner. Lift the piston connecting rod assembly on a special service rack, or put it in the horizontal position on a clean place on the floor. Remember, when the crankshaft is turned without a connecting rod, the big end bearing must be guided during the turning. Possible damage between the cylinder liner and the connecting rod bolts can occur if care is not taken. Dismantling the piston rings and gudgeon pin. Remove carbon deposits from the piston crown. Remove the piston rings with the help of piston ring pliers. Measure and record the piston ring grooves. Compare them to the tolerances given in the engine manual. Inspect the piston skirt. Never use emery cloth on the piston skirt because the skirt is coated with a special overlay. Check the piston rings. Remove the gudgeon pin securing ring using the special pliers. Note, never compress the securing ring more than necessary when removing it from the groove. Pull out by hand the gudgeon pin from its groove more than 50%. Connect the lifting tool and lift out the pin carefully. Mark the parts to ensure that you get them back into their original position. Measure the gudgeon pin clearance by measuring the pin diameters and the bearing diameters. If the bearing bore exceeds the wear limits, replace the bearing bushing. Check that the plugs in both ends of the gudgeon pin are properly fitted. Lift the piston onto the floor and turn it upside down. Open the connection bolts and remove the piston skirt. Check the piston top cooling gallery for cleanliness. Assemble the piston skirt back by using the maintenance instruction issue named Assembly of Wartsila 46 piston. Assembly of the gudgeon pin and piston rings. Lift the piston on a special rack on the connecting rod. Note: check that the gudgeon pin bearing and the piston are at the same level. Lubricate the gudgeon pin and assemble it into its bore. Mount the securing ring. If the securing ring is loose in its groove after mounting, it must be replaced with a new one. Mount new piston rings with the help of the piston ring pliers. Remember, piston rings 1, 2 and 3 are equipped with special marks. The marks must always be located on top of the rings. The rings should be placed with gaps located 180 degrees in relation to each other. Dismantling the cylinder liner. Clean the cylinder liner bore. Measure the liner diameter at certain levels according to a special form supplied with the engine manual. Compare the taken measurements with the tolerances and wear limits given in the engine manual. If the liner exceeds the given values, it must be replaced. Loosen the cylinder liner fastening screw and remove the holder. Remove the cylinder liner temperature sensors. Fit the cylinder liner lifting device and tighten the nuts lightly. Check that the lower part of the lifting device fits properly into the liner bore. Turn the crankshaft so that the support plate is possible to be put onto the counterweight fastening bolts. Turn the crankshaft to BDC and lift the hydraulic jack onto the support.
Joo. Sitten sä näytät. Joo, ja sit pannaan paikalle.
Connect the hoses of the hydraulic pump to the hydraulic jack. Pump pressure to the hydraulic tool to push the cylinder liner out. When the liner starts to move freely, use a crane to lift the liner out. Assembly of the cylinder liner. Change the O-rings and clean the liner and the bore of the engine block. Before assembly, lubricate the O-rings well and use a soft liquid gasket between the liner and the block. Assemble the liner into the engine block. Remember the position mark of the liner. Assemble the temperature sensors of the liner and cylinder liner fastening screw.
Yhtä saa laittaa paikalle.
Honing the cylinder liner. It is recommended to hone the cylinder liner whenever new piston rings are mounted. Normally, a so-called light honing is sufficient. The pitch angle of the honing marks must be 30 degrees, which is achieved by combining 40 strokes per minute with a rotating speed of 100 RPM. For cleaning purposes, a diesel oil is preferred. After honing, the liner must be carefully cleaned using a suitable brush or cloth. Dry with a cloth. Measure the liner again and record the figures to the special form. These measurements are for future reference, to compare the liner wear. Dismantling the big end bearing. Turn the cylinder in question to BDC. Remove the compression shim. Be sure the big end bearing stays in the normal running position when turning. Turn the big end bearing housing upside down and secure it in this position with the locking plates. Mount the distance sleeve for the hydraulic cylinders. Mount the hydraulic cylinders. Connect the hoses according to the diagram shown. Turn the cylinders to the bottom. Open the cylinders 3/4 of a turn, 270 degrees. Shut the pump valve and raise the pressure to the stated value. Loosen the nuts about 3/4 of a turn or 5 turns with the pin from side to side in the distance sleeve slot located underneath the hydraulic cylinder. Open the pump valve slowly. Check that the nuts and the cylinders are loose. Disconnect the hoses. Remove the locking plates. Fit the big end bearing removing device to the side of the engine. Turn the crankshaft to a suitable position to connect the big end bearing to the device with the connecting rod nuts. Remove the big end bearing nuts from the other side of the engine and fit the rods until they are against the support.
Okay.
Fit the inside support and remove the outside support. The lower half can be lifted away with an M12 eye bolt. Remove the rod. Slide the upper half out with the tool. Fit the M12 eye bolt and lift the big end bearing half away. Cover the crank pin oil hole with plugs or tape. Assembly of the big end bearing. Evaluate the condition of the big end bearing according to the engine manual. Remove the plugs or tape from the oil holes. Clean and oil the crank pin. Fit the bearing shell to the big end bearing upper half and oil only the bearing shell running surface. Slide the bearing carefully into position. Fit the rod to the opposite side of the engine together with the inside support. Fit the bearing shell to the lower half and oil only the bearing shell running surface. Remove the inside support and slide the lower half of the big end bearing carefully to its position. Fasten the big end bearing nuts by hand until the shells are contacting each other. Remove the mounting device. Turn the big end bearing upside down and secure it with the locking plates.
Hyvä.
Remember, before using hydraulic tools, that the torque of the studs must be checked. Lift on the hydraulic tightening tools.
Se tulee automaattisesti.
Joo, pois.
Connect the hoses according to the diagram shown. Connect the hoses to the pump and open the valve. Screw down the cylinders as far as they go. It is not necessary to turn back the cylinders before pumping. Close the pump valve and raise the pressure to the stated value.
Okay.
When tightening the big end bearing screws, it is recommended to raise the pressure twice to ensure a proper tightening. Open the valve slowly. Remove the hoses and the cylinders. Assembly of the piston and connecting rod. Turn the crankshaft to TDC. Note: when turning the crankshaft, be sure that the big end bearing is in its normal position, which means the connecting rod studs have space to turn. Clean the cylinder liner bore carefully and lubricate with engine oil. Lubricate the piston and clamp the piston rings with the special clamping device. Check and clean the contact surfaces for the conrod belonging to the big end bearing housing. Ensure the oil drilling is open. Turn the big end bearing housing to such a position that the bolts are pointing in the direction of the liner bore. Place the compression shim in its place after careful cleaning of the mating surfaces. Mount the assembly ring in the bore for the anti-polishing ring. This assembly ring will guide the piston and the piston rings into the liner. Lower the piston carefully down with the help of the lever and the guide for the connecting rod. Note: be careful not to damage the 4 connecting rod screws when lowering the conrod. Remove the lifting tool, as well as the assembly ring for the anti-polishing ring bore. Mount the anti-polishing ring. Fit 1 connecting rod nut and turn the connecting rod to BDC. Fit the rest of the nuts and tighten until seated. Remember, before using hydraulic tools, the torque of the studs must be checked. Put on 2 distance sleeves crosswise on the 2 diagonally opposite connecting rod screws. Screw on 2 hydraulic cylinders. Connect the hoses according to the figure shown. Open the pump valve. Keep on turning the hydraulic cylinders until the piston and the cylinder faces are even. It is not necessary to turn back the cylinder before pumping. Close the pump valve and raise the pressure to the stated value. When pumping, Close the nuts one at a time to ensure the bolts are tightened evenly. Shift over the hydraulic cylinders to the other two connecting rod screws and repeat the procedure. When tightening the connecting rod screws, it is recommended to raise the pressure twice to ensure proper tightening. Assembly of the cylinder head. Inspect the sealing surface for the cylinder head gasket, clean it, and after that the cylinder head is then ready for lifting. Replace the cylinder head gasket. Clean the sealing surface on top of the cylinder liner. Clean the exhaust pipe connection and coat it with heat-resistant paste. Clean the face of the air inlet pipe of the cylinder head. Replace the new O-ring with glue and grease it. Grease the cylinder liner top O-ring. Install the pipe for the starting air connection to the cylinder head. Change the O-rings for the push rod protection pipes. Grease the surfaces in contact with the O-rings. Pull down the protection pipes for the push rods into their lower position. Then lift on the cylinder head, lower it carefully and guide the push rod protection pipes into their bores. If necessary, guide the cylinder head to find its correct position. Put back the nuts of the cylinder head. Connect the exhaust gas pipe clamp after first brushing high temperature resistant paste on the bolts and the clamp parts. Connect the air inlet pipe to the cylinder head, or in other modifications, connect the air inlet pipe and the exhaust gas pipe clamps. Before assembly, check that the clearances are the same between the exhaust and the inlet clamp, lower and upper halves. Install the injection pipe. After this, mount the small pipes in front of the cylinder head, as well as the pipe for the pilot injection valve. Lift on the hydraulic tool set. Connect the hoses according to the figure shown, and screw down the cylinders to the bottom. It is not necessary to turn back the cylinder before pumping. Raise the pressure to the stated value. Follow each nut one at a time during pumping to be sure that all are closing properly. Finally, when the right pressure is reached, tighten the nuts properly and carefully release the pressure. Raise the pressure twice to ensure proper tightening before disconnecting the hoses. Check that the cylinders are loose. Put back the insulation cover for the exhaust pipe to the rear of the cylinder head. Grease the O-rings of the water pipe and install the water pipes. Turn the crankshaft for the cylinder in question to TDC for firing. Put back the push rods. Install the yokes and lift on the rocker arm bracket with rocker arms. Then adjust first the yoke and then the valve clearance. Loosen the adjusting screws of the valves as well as the yoke. Turn the adjusting screws in an anti-clockwise direction to provide ample clearance. Press down the adjustable end of the yoke and screw down the adjusting screw until it is touching the valve stem. Note this position A. Then push down the fixed end of the yoke to get the clearance between the yoke and the yoke pin to shift over to the opposite side. Continue to screw down the adjusting screw until the screw is touching the valve stem again. Note this second position, B. Finally, turn back the screw until midway between A and B. This is the final position called C. Lock the locking nut for the yokes in the C position. Then adjust the valve clearance using the right feeler gauge, either for the inlet valve or for the exhaust valve side. This is done by putting the feeler gauge between the yoke and the shoe of the rocker arm. Tighten the adjusting screw until the feeler gauge can be moved to and fro with only a slight resistance. Hold the adjusting screw and tighten the locking screw. Please note, don't over-tighten this locking screw. Always use a torque wrench. Finally, mount the casing for the top cover as well as the top cover for the cylinder head.
Hyvä.
Dismantling the main bearings. Remove both crankcase covers on each side of the bearing. Remove carefully the main bearing temperature sensor and make sure that it will not be damaged while working with the bearing. Remove the caps from the side screws of the bearing in question. Lift the distance sleeves into position on the side screws. Both sides can be loosened simultaneously. Screw on the hydraulic tool. Connect the hoses of the hydraulic pump according to the figure and open the pump valve. Keep turning the hydraulic tool until the piston and cylinder end faces are at the same level. Turn the hydraulic tool back half a turn. Shut the pump valve and pump to the stated pressure. Open the nut half a turn using the special pin, or with the same pin, turn the nut 5 times from side to side in the distant sleeve slot. Open the pump valve slowly. Disconnect the hoses and unscrew the hydraulic tool. Remove the nuts from the side screws by hand. Fit the bar, together with the transport device and tackle, into position inside the crankcase, or use a special transport rail that is delivered with engine tools. Lift the hydraulic jack inside the engine, using the mounting device connected to the tackle. Screw the hydraulic jack using a wrench when at the right position. Repeat the procedure with the other screw by fitting the hydraulic jack from the other side of the engine. Connect the hoses of the hydraulic pump to hydraulic jacks according to the figure shown and open the pump valve. Keep turning the hydraulic tool as long as it rotates. Repeat the procedure a few times to get all the oil out from the jack. Turn the hydraulic jack back 3/4 of a turn. Shut the pump valve and pump to the stated pressure. Loosen the nuts 3/4 of a turn using the special pin or by turning the same pin 5 times side to side in the distant sleeve slot located underneath the hydraulic cylinder. Open the pump valve slowly. Disconnect the hoses after checking that the nuts and the cylinders are loose. Unscrew the hydraulic tools and remove the hydraulic jacks from the crankcase using the tool and the tackle. Connect the hoses to the hydraulic hand pump to the hydraulic jack. The supplying hose must be set to the side marked down. From the connection up, the hose is preferred to be connected back to the pump chamber. Use only clean engine oil. Remove the side screws in order to be able to lower the main bearing cap. Use a stud remover. Remove the nuts of the main bearing screws. Lower the main bearing cap by pumping oil pressure to the hydraulic jack with the hydraulic hand pump if necessary. Be careful if the bearing cap comes down without pumping. Control the lowering speed with the valves of the pump. Remove the lower bearing shell by hand. Insert the turning tool into the main bearing journal radial oil hole. Turn the crankshaft carefully until the bearing shell has turned half a turn and can be removed. Cover the two main bearing journal radial oil holes with tape or plastic plugs. Assembling the main bearing. Clean the bearing shells and check for wear, scoring and other damage. Main bearing shells are of the tri-metal type and can be used until the overlay is partially worn off. The main bearing journal should be inspected for surface damage. Clean the main bearing shells, the cap and the journal very carefully. Take off the protecting tapes or plugs from the journal oil holes and lubricate the journal with clean engine oil. Lubricate the bearing surface, rear side and end faces of the upper bearing shell with clean lubricating oil. The main bearing journal should be inspected for surface damage. Clean the main bearing shells, the cap and the journal very carefully. Take off the protecting tapes or plugs from the journal oil holes and lubricate the journal with clean engine oil. Lubricate the bearing surface, rear side and end faces of the upper bearing shell with clean lubricating oil. Place the end of the bearing shell in the slot between the journal and the bearing bore, with the lug guiding in the oil groove, and push it by hand as far as possible. Insert the turning tool into the main bearing journal radial oil hole, and turn the crankshaft carefully until the bearing shell has turned into position. Take care that the bearing shell lug slides into the oil groove without being damaged. Lubricate the bearing surface and both ends of the lower bearing shell with clean lubricating oil and place it in the bearing cap. Connect the hoses of the hydraulic hand pump to the hydraulic jack. The supplying hose is connected to the side marked up. From the connection down, the hose can be connected back to the pump chamber. Grease the guide faces of the main bearing cap. Lift the main bearing cap by pumping oil pressure to the hydraulic jack with the hydraulic hand pump. Screw the main bearing nuts into position by hand. Make sure that the bearing caps and shells are correctly in the joining places. Clean the side screws properly and lubricate the threads. Fit the screws and tighten to the bottom by hand or using the tool. Change the O-rings. Tighten the side screw nuts by hand. Lift the distance sleeve into position on the side screw at the rear side. Screw on the hydraulic tool and connect the hoses, as shown in the figure. Shut the pump valve and pump the pre-tightening pressure to 200 bar, rear side. Tighten the nuts using the pin. Remember before using hydraulic tools that the torque of the studs must be checked. Lift the hydraulic cylinders for the main bearing into position using the mounting device. Connect the hoses of the hydraulic pump. Keep on turning the cylinders as far as it rotates. Shut the pump valve. It is not necessary to turn back the cylinders before pumping. Pump to the stated pressure and tighten the nuts using the pin. Please note, when tightening the main bearing screws, it is recommended to raise the pressure twice to ensure proper tightening. Reinstall the main bearing temperature sensor. Lift the distance sleeve into position on the side screw at the rear side. Both sides can be connected simultaneously. Screw on the hydraulic tool. Connect the hoses and pump to the full stated pressure. Tighten the nut. Lift the distance sleeve into position on the maneuvering side screw. Screw on the hydraulic tool. Connect the hoses and pump to the full stated pressure. Tighten the nut.